Welcome to the Shameless Podcast, where I help Christian men kill shame, stand strong, and live on mission. I'm your host, Ken Freire, and I'm bringing you real stories, practical insights, and biblical truths that equip you to break free from your sin, shame, and live a life of purpose. Let's step out of the shadows together and into the light of Christ. Another episode, and today I have a really special guest because we've been friends now for over 10 years. He may not call me a friend, but we'll see after this podcast episode. I'm so excited to have Matthew Wyatt here today. Matthew, we are going to be talking about the title of the podcast is Fat, Sick, and Spiritually Dead. But we're going to talk about your weight journey and then your lust journey and how you've overcome both of those things. So I'm excited. You are a serial entrepreneur, and right now you're living overseas with your family, and we work together at a university. So, dude, welcome to the podcast.
Years. Crazy. Thank you so much for having me, Ken. It's really cool to be here. It's kind of wild. Like so I know, like, always in this sort of thing, you want to like share something about yourself, and I feel like it's more interesting if you share something that you've just never shared before with anyone or anything, right? And so I think it's important that you know that while I promised to tell the truth this whole time, I have not always told the truth. I had a friend who is one of those friends where, like, if you say something and smile, they'll just sort of go along with it. And we were hanging out with a group of friends, and one guy was like, I've heard every story you guys have. I was like, well, you haven't heard this one. And I made up this crazy elaborate story about us taking his car and going on this crazy joyride and then getting pulled over and lying to the cops and saying, no, we're on our way to go work at this hospital, and then going to the hospital, and this is the cops trying to prove us wrong. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, right? It was this crazy story. And people were so convinced that the story was true that they started asking me to tell it like at like parties. And like I told it at his wedding, and I told it at another friend's wedding. And sometimes I'd switch the characters and people never noticed. And finally, recently, I got a very angry call from my buddy's wife, who was like, I just found out that story wasn't true. I've believed that story for 7 years, and it wasn't true. And I'm like, don't you think he would have told you that? Like, you dated for a while. But so that's the seriousness with which I take storytelling and my sense of humor. But
that's awesome, dude. Well, for those of you who are listening and may know Matthew, you know he has a great sense of humor. He used to be a comedian. He would still call himself a comedian. So we're going to have a lot of jokes that we probably throw in, a lot of maybe dark humor throughout.
Very serious. Only seriousness.
Yeah, super serious the whole time. Matthew, dude, I know you have been on an amazing health journey the last couple of years. And when I first met you, you know, you were overweight or obese. I guess what would be the right terminology
medically, they
that
use
you
the
would
term
use?
Morbidly obese, because if you add the word morbid, that somehow makes people feel better. I don't. It's like, it was very encouraging, right? Yeah.
You just
It's
throw
morbid,
the shame on top of you, like, no, you're not just
contributing to my fatness, right? Like, it was perfect.
Okay, so you were morbidly obese. But man, over the last several years, you have changed drastically. How much weight did you lose?
I weighed in, like when you actually knew me pretty close to my heaviest. And my heaviest, I weighed in just under 350 pounds. And so when I was a fair amount lighter when I got serious about like making this transformation and everything. I had lost weight for bad reasons because I was sick from being overweight and different. And even at that, I was still over 300 pounds. So I lost, in that time, I lost a little over 142 pounds in 11 months. So it was a dramatic, dramatic change.
Dude.
So yes, my humor is still morbid, but my weight is not. So it's a good change for sure. And and it's like, I mean, kind of like to the title of the episode, right? I wasn't just fat. I was sick. I had severe sleep apnea. I had fatty liver disease. I already have degenerative disc in my back, which is hereditary, but throw onto that being literally twice the weight that you should be. And that was, of course, always a problem. And it was miserable. Like I couldn't, you can't fly on a plane without getting, an extension for your seatbelt. You can't really play with your kids. I mean, it was just, I think the worst is you look in the mirror, you don't like what you see. Like you don't like yourself, and you live under this kind of quiet shame, and you cope. And that's how that's why some of the fattest people are some of the funniest people, because it's a coping mechanism, right? It's a way of getting away from the whatever they're feeling bad about. So yeah, okay, so I'm ugly, but I'm funny. It's fine. It's great. You don't have to be ugly to be funny. Like it's not an either or thing, apparently. But yeah, so that was where I came from, and I'd always been big. Like my whole as a kid, I was big. At first it was like, this is great, I'll play football, and then everyone got tall, and I didn't get tall, so then I was just big, and there was really nothing to do with it from there. And when I was little, and this plays into kind of our bigger conversation too. When I was little, I always assumed that as I got older, one day I would just deal with it. One day something would change, and I would just magically, like it would just change. And that didn't just happen on its own. Like it didn't. That day came and went. Like it never happened. Yeah, which was frustrating. I got past when I thought by the time I was an adult, I'd be thin and healthy, or I thought that maybe by the time I settled down, I'd get thin and healthy, or like I wanted it, but I wished for it, right? Like I didn't decide to do it. I didn't take action, meaningful action to do it. I just wished for it, and that doesn't work. I mean, it just oh, that'd be great.
I wish wishing worked.
My whole life. I just need that wish granted, and I'm set. But no.
How did you handle the every day to day? Deep down inside you had this tension of you wishing for it to go away, but you didn't like yourself, and you were coping with humor. You're coping with a lot of things like that, but how did you handle
well, and
those emotions?
That kind of cuts to the quick. That cuts to the heart of it. I did what most people do. I found distractions. I found ways to focus on anything but dealing with myself, confronting difficulty with life, because these were deeper frustrations and issues, unforgiveness I had towards myself, unforgiveness I had towards others. And rather than putting in the work of dealing with those things, I would eat, or I would masturbate. I would look at porn. I would go and play video. And I'm not anti video game, but I'm anti anything that you're using as a distraction to do instead of today. The one that's easiest to fall on is my phone, right? Like I can use my phone as a tool, or I can just get so lost in my phone that my phone's my world. And I'm doing this instead of being present at the table with my wife and kids, or doing it instead of being in the conversation with my friends. And we find these little distractions and we use those to self-medicate. Because the truth is, even though I lived with the consequences of being morbidly obese every single day, I never thought about it because thinking about it hurt. So I resisted that. I found distractions. And the problem with distractions is not only do they fail to make the pain go away, but some of those distractions are bad for you. And then you feel bad about those things. So then you need to be distracted from those things. So it becomes this vicious cycle where it's like, oh, I tried to stop doing this, or I tried to stop doing that, and I failed. Well, now I feel worse about myself. And so it becomes this self-destructive just cycle. And then I remember there'd be times I would get so frustrated that I would almost, it was almost like when I was a young man, it was almost like I'd go into a self-destruct mode. I just reach a point where I don't give an F. Whatever. I'm just going to go. And those were the most dangerous times for me to be alone or around other people, because I would go and make stupid choices. And it was, so on this side of it, I can see it now. What I didn't see at the time was that it was very self-serving. I didn't care about anything else. I didn't care about anyone else. And I think when you're in that moment, whether you're eating to self-medicate or masturbating to self-medicate or looking at porn or heck, if sometimes you just binge watching, like whatever it is, whatever this thing, it becomes this idol, and it gets your focus, it gets your devotion, and you're not you're loving that. You're not loving the things that God wants you to love. And the irony of that is that you are one of the things God wants you to love, right? So you're working against His love for you. You're working against it. You're working. It's this whole it's the you're not going to fight your battle alone. You're going to pick someone to fight the battle with you. You're either going to pick God or you're going to pick Satan. And so it's either you and Satan versus Satan, let's see who wins, or you and God versus Satan, let's see who wins, right? You never fight it alone. And so that was what made it worse and worse, and how I went from, oh, I'll never be over 250 pounds. Oh, I'll never be over 300 pounds. Or, oh, I'll never be over. You keep making these little promises to yourself, and then you keep breaking them, and then it's hopeless. And so then well, but I can be good at this, and I'm just gonna let that go. And you get in, well, for me, I guess I can't say you, for me personally, I got into this state of self-delusion where I think I didn't want to admit that it was as bad as it was. I can literally look at pictures of myself from then. I look at a picture of myself from 2008, 2009, and I'm just like, that's what I looked like, because I didn't think I looked like that. I was that disconnected. I knew I was heavy, but I thought I looked like I did when I graduated high school. When I graduated high school, I was 250 pounds. I was big for a high schooler. It's crazy thing. I was bigger than I am today, quite a bit. But at the time, so that's what I thought Fat Matthew looked like, right? And you just don't think of it as doing anything wrong, like not taking care of myself, not being a good steward of this gift. And then that all the self-medicating stuff, because it does serve a purpose, right? It stops the pain. And so when you're in it, you think about it, you feel bad about it. And then when you're not doing it, you compartmentalize it, like, oh, this isn't a part of my life right now, so it's fine. Yep, God hates my sin, so do I. It's fine. We're on the same team.
Yeah. And what's fascinating about all that is that, like, as I listen to it, how you were in a place where the distractions, you talk about that vicious cycle, you needed a deeper and bigger distraction. Right? Because the first one, the level one didn't work after a while. So you needed something one. And that was fascinating is how you said it, like you were in this delusional phase of life. How did you all of a sudden just like one day wake up and be like, I need to change. This is too much.
I wish I could say that I just had this incredible moment where I was like, that's it. Enough is enough. I'm drawing a line in the sand. On this day, October 26th of 2020, like I did that 100 times, where I would promise myself, this was it. I'm done. I'm going to change this, or this is it. I'm done. I'm going to change that. And I hit this more because it's funny because gluttony is a sin, but it's not one we talk about. So I didn't feel much guilt on that front. But of course, when you use pornography to masturbate, you have an orgasm, and it's not a satisfying orgasm. It's not a holy orgasm. It's the, oh, bleep, what did I do orgasm, which isn't what it's supposed to be, right? Like God created this to be this wonderful thing that is this, consummation of this incredible relationship that He's anointed. And instead, it's you running away from your problems, and when you stop running, they're still right there. And so it's not satisfying, right? So I would love to say that I planted that flag and that was it. But every time I planted that flag, it didn't work. It constantly didn't work. And then I got more upset with myself because then I failed and I have to scribble out the datum, whatever I wrote it on, or whether I put it on my wall or told my accountability friends or whatever thing I was trying. But it actually took, it was weird because it actually took two things had to go sort of right at the same time. On the fitness front, it was actually my best friend Shane, who you've met Shane because he was as well.
Great
Yeah,
guy.
and
We worked together for a little bit.
so he went on a fitness journey first, and this was the guy who he was one of the bigger guys I knew, and he was someone who like if I was frustrated, like I would sit and eat a crap ton of ice cream, and he could keep up with me. You know, like it's great life choices. And I watched him radically change. Radically change, reverse his diabetes, go from a very pear-shaped physique to like he took this one picture of himself where I was like, dude, you look like a freaking superhero. Like it was cool. And what that created for me was belief because suddenly there was evidence. And I think this is something we're desperate for in all of this because as the church, we're starting to address this. In these things, there's always this requirement where you have to badmouth the church. We forget that the church is A, Christ's bride, and B, literally us. So whatever effort we're doing is what the church is doing, right? Be like, no, the church isn't talking about this. Yeah, hi, welcome to church. Yeah, we are. But we've not always done a good job. We talk about the negative. We talk about the problem. We don't have a lot of people talking about how not only is it not okay to look at porn or to have an addiction to porn and porn-assisted masturbation and all this stuff, but you don't have to do it. You can actually be free. Success is actually possible.
Yeah.
And so seeing him change, this might actually be possible. And at the same time, I had reached that point, and is what you had kind of alluded to earlier, where everything that I was doing on the sexual sin side of my life was one-upping. And so I had gone from just the casually looking at pictures to the going in online messaging boards, and it reached the point now where I found myself sending like messages to the same person. And that for me was a red flag because I'm like, I'm allowed to cheat on my wife if I don't stop this. I actually went to Shane and told him, I'm having a hard time with this. And he's like, well, obviously you have to friggin' stop. And I just told myself, I was like, all right, I'm just not going to message this person anymore. It's going to be fine. That's it. I drew a line, done. And a week later, I messaged that person. And I got scared. And it's funny because it would be really easy to be like, oh, it was really brave. You stepped up and said, hey, this is a problem. I need help. No, I've watched enough people in Christian service, in Christian leadership, and in businesses who stand out and say, hey, I'm a follower of Jesus. I watched enough of them hide their sin because of their pride and go down hard. We've all seen it. And I was like, man, if this keeps going this direction, that's going to be me. I am going to end up there. And if I don't suddenly take this way more seriously than I am going to lose everything, hurt a lot of people, do more to hurt the credibility of the gospel than I've ever done for the glory of God, which is literally the reason I exist. And so I took some actually accused me of overreacting, and it was only out of the belief that I couldn't afford to underreact, and there was no way to really know where the line was. So I brought it to my wife. I brought it to the family and ministries leadership at my church. I brought it to leadership where I was working at the time because I was serving in a Christian organization at the time. And I joined a men's group at my church where we were talking about these things. And so it almost coincidentally happened that I started focusing on my health and fitness and purity at the same time. Which I know, like the grace of God in the craziest way. Because what I didn't know then, and of course I very much get now, is how deeply connected these things really are. And that, yeah, like I said, I had no idea, right? So it wasn't that I suddenly figured it out, or thankfully it wasn't that I like went and had an affair and, you know, it was losing everything and had to hit rock bottom. But I reached a point where it became clear that that magic day wasn't going to happen. I wasn't just suddenly going to be grown up enough that I didn't deal with lust anymore. I wasn't just suddenly going to be, you know, that thing that as a young man I thought would go away when my libido calmed down or when I got married. The thing that we get wrong in that is we think that our need that we're trying to meet is sex. We think it's just this biological desire. And that's not what we're trying to meet, right? The need we really have to meet is healing and redeeming, like this pain, these things that we've been running from, right? Things that can only be dealt with, obviously, in partnership with Jesus Christ, with the Holy Spirit. And it's going through it, forgiving people who genuinely hurt us, whether they deserve it or not, because that's not what forgiveness is about, right? Forgiving ourselves and recognizing that our sin is bad, but we are not. At creation, God did not say, you know, it's very good, and then like, oh, but it's going to sin badly and not be worth it. Wipe it all from the earth. I mean, he came close with the flood, but he spared us, right? So to just throw humanity out with sin is to pass a harsher judgment than the one God himself is passing, right? And so it was crazy that, and I'm so thankful, really, that I ended up trying to confront these two things together. And if you'd asked me to plan it that way at the time, I actually would have thought it was a bad idea because I would have thought that I was overextending myself, trying to dramatically change these two, what in my delusional mind was completely separate issues, right? Like, why would I try to, you know, like, I'm not going to go learn a language and go fix my car at the same time. Like, why would I try to do, you know, they're just not related things. But self-discipline, taking care of our bodies, caring about ourselves as people, and how we then interact with everyone else, how we deal with ourselves spiritually, physically, inside and out, that there's no duality. There's no, like, we try to compartmentalize. Absolutely.
It was
The
all
compartments don't
interconnected.
work. The compartments, you know what it is? You know those crappy box shelves that you get from IKEA that have the squares, right? You think you're putting all these things in this, but there's no back. There's no back.
Yeah.
So it all just gets pushed through. It all ends up on a pile behind
Yeah.
the stupid shelf. That's life.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
On the top of the baseboard. Like, it's just so
Absolutely.
annoying.
And if you don't deal with it, it's going to start on fire. So hooray for you. Yeah.
Exactly. So, Matthew, as you think about this, I have an observation, and I think this is maybe what you're talking about, right? When you think about scripture, like in Romans 1, it talks about like almost leaving you to a depraved mind. Like, I'm going to let you be in this delusion that you were just like, I'm going to keep falling. But then God, in his grace and mercy, you kind of had like a Paul experience where he started to rip the scales out and you started to see how deeply these things were integrated and how deeply like you have all these sins that have been committed to you and sins that you've committed and all this hurt and pain. And now these scales are open and you're like, that's a lot of stuff I got to deal with.
So
how did you start to overcome that?
Again, I was fortunate in the fitness program that I did. So I had my coach, this gal named Carmen O'Quinn, brilliant woman, loves the Lord. She actually had a similar fitness journey where she used to be morbidly obese, lost a ton of weight, has kept it off for years, and she's actually since devoted herself to, like, that's the work she does. She helps other people transform their lives as well. And so she had launched a YouTube show, actually, to help support it, called The Biggest Transformation. and Shane had been on it season 1 because they knew each other. They'd worked together years ago. He actually worked for her once upon a time. And so I was in season 2. And what's interesting was that in that we had a time where we literally made a list of all the like mean things or bad things that people had said or done to us about our weight. And then we went through and actually out loud, like we forgave these people. And it was clear that well, there's a lot of unforgiveness that I haven't dealt with in my life. And at the same time, being in that guys group, it kept coming out. Like I'm watching, and I felt really spoiled, almost guilty, because so many of the guys that were in that group because their marriages had fallen apart. They had gone too far, too long. The very thing that I was afraid of was their story. And so as they're sharing their things, as they're talking about that, I'm just like, yeah, short of me repenting and forgiving those, right? Short of me forgiving those who've harmed me and repenting and asking for forgiveness of what I've done, he'll absolutely let me. He loves me too much to not let me hit bottom. This will get worse. And if I don't start treating my body better, I'm going to pay for it with my health or my life. And if I don't start treating my heart, I don't mean like my physical heart, I mean like my spiritual, like my heart. Because when you're yeah, well, yeah, absolutely.
And for you, it was both, actually, right?
My resting heart rate. This is funny now. And at the time I laughed about it, and the fact that I laughed about it then is actually sad. When I was at my least healthy, I bought a Fitbit, thinking, it's some novelty. I'm neurodivergent as the day is long, so I know that if I can inject novelty into something, I can use that for motivation. And so I was like, I bought a Fitbit, and I was sitting, and this is when I was working at the university. I'm sitting there, and the watch buzzes. Great job, 4 hours of exercise. And I look, and sure enough, my heart rate, my resting heart rate, was so stinking high that it thought I was exercising. And I would joke, I'm like, so I knew I had to do something right away, so I stopped wearing a Fitbit. And like, it's funny now, and it was funny then, but it was also really sad because it was true. That's what I actually did. I turned off that feature. I didn't even put in the work of taking off the stupid watch. I turned off the feature, and that was it. That was my transformative response to, like, because I didn't want to deal with it. And then I went back to work. I did my work. I went home. I hid, look at porn. And then because I hated myself, I was less kind to the other people that I also love, right? Because so much of our ability and our capacity to love comes out of our understanding of God's love for us and us learning to love ourselves through understanding how he loves us. And then we're able to better love others. And so the lousy thing was, here's this woman who God has given me, whom I love so much, and I wasn't nice to her. Like, I couldn't just be a decent person and be kind. And so, it was ugly, right? I don't know if I actually answered your question. I sort of storied off a bit. Oh, because you're how you
no, it's okay.
God will let you go far enough to the bad. And it was scary because you watch some friends who they'd go through on similar journeys, but then they would choose to turn their backs on God, or they would choose to, one way to deal with the pain is to pretend that the things you're doing to deal with the pain are good and okay and endorse them. And, it's this whole, we're going to lean into sexual sin. And it's that difference between guilt and shame, right? And people get into the semantics and they play with the words back and forth and whatever, right? But it's like that bad feeling, call it whatever you want, that you have when you sin, right? It's similar to when you touch something that's too hot, like the stove or the grill, and it burns, right? You're supposed to feel that pain, but you're only supposed to feel that pain so that you take your hand off the heat, right? You're supposed to feel that pain so you can change direction and stop hurting yourself. You're not supposed to sit there, hold your hand on the grill and be like, man, the grill is so hot. I can't believe I'm touching the grill. What is wrong with me? They do.
And then
They
some people throw their
really,
whole
we
body into it.
really do. And the thing that I'm most flabbergasted and grateful for is I look at like my friends who've fallen into this. I'm no smarter than them. I'm no like I'm not I'm but for God, but for grace go I. Like I don't I don't know. I almost am like, I don't know why I got spared when others didn't. It's like to that extreme, right? But I will say this, if God puts in front of someone the reality of this, the opportunity to choose, they can choose, right? It's a beautiful thing. And that's where I found myself with a community that was able to support me in both decisions, even when I didn't feel like making those decisions. Because on the fitness journey and on the repentance journey, it sucks that that's a journey. Repent literally means turn and go the other way. It should be a one and done. But for both of them, there were definitely times when I didn't want like my desire was contrary to my greater desire, right? There's my greater desire. I want to be someone who doesn't sin. I want to be someone who takes care of myself. But in the moment, in frustration, you've worn this neural pathway, this familiar road, and you're just like, I'm going to go back to that. I mean, it's the dog returning to their vomit, right? Like, whoa.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah.
So Matthew, as you think about that, you had a lot of
Absolutely.
the journey was slow, right? Where for you of like slowly turning, and I think that's for a lot of us, especially when there's like addiction
Mm-hmm.
involved or a lot of coping mechanisms. It took a while. Speak to those who might be in that phase right now where they're just like, I'm
Yeah.
actually dealing with a lot of shame. I know I'm
Yeah.
overweight. I know I'm struggling with porn, and
Mm.
I'm kind of in that delusion. How would you
Yeah.
speak to them to kind of wake up a little bit so that they can start that
Right.
journey of
That's a great question. I would start I would not start inspirational. I would start by saying plainly, this is not going to fix itself. And you will, at some point, pay for this. There will be a consequence. It will come. You will have to either turn it around or live with the break that comes from it. But the good news is that you can, and many have before you. The enemy wants to isolate you, make you think that you can't do it. Your problem is somehow special. Your sin is somehow special. We're in the culture where we're all so freaking special. The good news is you're not special. Like there is nothing that you are facing that God doesn't understand. There is nothing that you are facing that your other brothers in Christ haven't faced. There is nothing before you that is unique to you and cannot be overcome. And on the other side of this is the identity that Christ made for you and has for you. And that is you as his pure and spotless bride.
Dude, that's so good. Just to think about the complete transformation of like, I love how you're talking about like, let's face reality. This is where you're at. Like, let's not live in delusion.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, when you do that, on the other side, God's grace is not just like, hey, I forgive you. He's also like, I've made you completely new. You're the bride of Christ. You are a child of God. You are a royal priesthood, right? Like all those
Right.
things are true. And they only come
Yeah. Let's
if
be clear.
you get out of the
God,
delusion
God really
and face
likes
reality
you.
and come to God.
Like,
Come to God.
like the enemy will get us into this weird spot where we actually think that God likes us because he has to like us. Well, he made us. He made all of it. He's obligated. No, he genuinely likes you. And like wrapping your head around that is a big deal because ultimately, like it can be slow, it can be a grind, but there's a moment, and I wish, and I don't have a date for it because whenever I tried to put dates on them, it didn't work. because those dates are when the date asks the question, when did I stop doing this? When did I stop doing that? When did I stop being a fat guy that just eats all the things? When did I stop looking at porn? When did I stop, using masturbation as an escape? When did I stop, like all this stuff? No. We step into an identity and we let that identity, who does God say you are? And who do you say you are? I reached the point where I don't do that anymore. Like that became my line. That became my, like, I don't do that anymore. That's not who God made me. And God agrees with me. Right.
And that's not
And
who
as
you
that
are.
becomes your identity, like even now, it's funny because in the last, as you mentioned, I'm living abroad now. And as I've moved here, I'm still figuring out routines and everything. The food is different. Exercise is different. I don't have my little home gym and all my weights and all that. And it's challenging because as you live and walk out that identity, the things you say about yourself, you prove to yourself, it becomes this social proof to yourself that it's true, right? I'm a person who works out. I'm a person who makes choices that are healthy when I eat. That doesn't mean that I never eat unhealthy things, but I don't eat to harm my body. I don't eat if I eat something, if I eat ice cream, I eat it because it tastes good and I like ice cream, not because it's going to make me stop feeling something. And there's no context in which looking at porn can be a healthy thing, right? And I find, well, what do I do? Well, I sleep at night, or at least try to. When I have a feeling or a concern or something, I give voice to it. I don't try to convince my wife that I'm some perfect person that she already knows I'm not. I don't try to be better looking than I am. And there's freedom that comes in that, right? Like I'm a person whom God loves who doesn't look at porn. So I don't look at porn because that's not who I am. That's not what I do. And when you step into identity in any of these things, that's when you really experience freedom. Because then to do these things just goes against who you are. And the enemy's going to attack your identity regardless. So it doesn't, like either side of it. Like it's like
all the time.
Yeah, you do too much, you do too little. You can't. No, you step into who God says you are, and you put that on, and you walk in that.
Yeah, and I found that that's a daily thing that I always have to do, and sometimes moment by moment. After a meeting, I'm like, I wanted to drop kick that person, but that's not who I am. So, like just a reminder. Matthew, go. I was going to say, as we wrap up here, there are people who are going to listen to this, and there are guys who are like, I know I want to get there. I know I want to be where you're at. I know I'm struggling, but I need that support system. I don't have that support system. What's maybe the best way to reach out to you? Maybe just to get some encouragement and kind of guide you to something, or what's a good program that you know that they could join in and start getting help?
A slew of programs out there and different things. As far as reaching out to me goes, any social media channel is fine. They're all kind of the same. They all vent into the same thing. Shoot me a message. I'm always happy to talk. If you're in the United States, I'm in a very different time zone, so I will respond when I can. You're probably messaging me while I sleep. But yeah. Real Matthew Wyatt or Matthew Wyatt on any social is probably me. Looks like this, but with slightly better hair because it's very, very photoshopped. But beyond that, as far as like really stepping out, I would look at whether or not your church has like a pure desire group. Those are quite good. You've got to look at kind of do your own check as far as what you're comfortable with. Some of the groups can be very, this is who we are and this is who we'll always be. And that can be good for a season, but discouraging long term. Beyond that, it's really finding other like godly men, godly brothers that you can walk alongside. You've already taken a great first step in that, even just in the fact that you're watching this and you've gotten this far in this, because it means that you're taking it seriously. You're investing some time here. I know, and spoilers, whatever, but I know there's whispers of a possible community that could exist in this space. That would be a great resource. And there are, if you go to, again, I like Pure Desire as a ministry. They do all things. I don't love absolutely everything about their approach, but I love their heart. They've seen a lot of men free, which is a beautiful thing. And there are groups on there. There's, I'm trying to remember who does the Courageous. Is it called Courageous? I'm trying to remember the name of the program. Yeah, I feel like they've
It used to
renamed
be called Courageous. I'm trying to remember.
uh,
They did.
Yeah, and there's a whole
It's the
video
Conquer
series that goes
series.
with it that can be done as a small group or whatever. And it's a little heavy-handed, but it's and there's truth in it, and it's done by men who love God and are walking in freedom, and you can't argue with the fruit. I like them a lot, just because I know people they've helped. The biggest thing is keep it in front of you. Be intentional. Yeah, it doesn't have to be your life. The freedom is your life. Jesus is your life. And that's the thing, is that eventually you're able to actually take your eyes off all this and put them on Jesus. And that's the real deal, right? Like, that's the real thing. Like, you get all these little ministries and programs that are so obsessed with what they're doing that they're not, it feels like they're not looking at Jesus. Look at Jesus.
Yeah, 100%. And that's one of the things I'm always trying to tell guys when I've helped them overcome pornography is like, hey, obviously there's this current situation, but like the ultimate goal is that you are looking to Jesus, seeing how he made you, seeing how he loves you. And out of the overflow of that, you go live out your God-given purpose, right? And if you're doing that, man, God's going to do those things. And like you said, there might be a membership or something, like, we'll see what happens. But those are the things that we are shooting for, and doing it in such a way that it's shameless, where you can walk in a place where there's freedom and joy. And I get it. And you and I both get it. We've been there. We've been through the struggle. And I love how you first started this at the beginning. And I'll wrap up this conversation, is like, you're like, not a lot of people are talking about. And this is why I started the podcast, because I was like, I want to get people like you who are like, here's my story. Because there's a lot of people who are overweight and obese, like, especially in America, it's a big deal, right? So imagine what could happen if people hear your story and be like, I love it what you said, what Shane did. He brought you belief. He gave you belief, like, it is possible. And for those of you who are listening, I want you to know it's 100% possible for you to see the healing and the transformation, both in your weight journey and in your lust journey, right? Like, both of those can happen. And that's what we're both excited for. Matthew, in the last 20 seconds, what would be one thing that you just want people to walk away with?
Do this alone, but do it. You are worth doing this.
Dude, so good. Matthew, thank you so much, man, for being on the podcast. And thank you for what you're doing overseas. I know that that's going to be a huge work. You know, I'm praying for you. My family's praying for you. And
love it.
I look forward to the next time we get to hang out. All right. Gentlemen, for those of you who are listening, thank you for watching this podcast. Remember, every single time I tell you this, the reason for this podcast is to kill shame, stand strong, and be on mission. We'll be back next week. Hope you guys have a great day, and God bless. Thanks for joining us today. If you found this episode helpful, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. Remember, killing shame isn't just about breaking free from the past. It's about walking boldly into the future God has for you.